I had no idea. No idea what Canadian whiskey of that time period would be like. We're going to find out. Hello and welcome to My Tiny Bottles, the project where I'm exploring my grandmother's legacy of miniature liquor bottles, one tiny bottle at a time. I'm your host, Tammy Coxon, and today I am here with my friend Jered Floyd. Because Jered a while back brought me kind of fantastic vintage bottle and said, maybe we can do something with this. And I said, aha, let's make some cocktails with it. But first, let's taste it on a video with some other bottles. So Jered, what is this?
So this is really interesting. I don't have high hopes for how it's actually going to taste because of the era and because of the quality at that point in time.
That's okay. I don't have high hopes for these either.
But this is a bottle of Carleton Tower Canadian whiskey, which I found in my parents' cellar. So my parents don't really drink much at all. My father might have a Gibson from time to time.
Okay.
And I can convince my mother to drink a very sweet wine. But my father was a physician, so he often received wine and whiskey as gifts and also to give to others. So there were actually other brothers or sisters of this bottle in the cellar still. If it does turn out to be great, we can go and retrieve them later.
How many do you think there are?
I think there may be 2 more in Michigan somewhere.
So like some fine Canadian whiskeys like Crown Royal, this one comes in a bag. It's really quite a fantastic bottle, right? If somebody presented this to you today.
It's pretty awesome looking, yeah.
Yeah, and so...
Gold.
Indeed, and so it's got a little explainer on it. And what it says on the explainer is that this is a blend of several rare reserves, none less than a decade in age, and in this special bottling, some distilled as far back as 1920.
Wow.
Now, in terms of when this bottle comes from, handy because of the tax labeling situation in Canada, we know that the youngest whiskey in here was distilled in 1946. So this probably bottled in 1956.
Okay.
So that's what we've got here. I had no idea what Canadian whiskey of that time period would be like. We're going to find out. But when I said, okay, if we're going to open that, let's compare it to some other Canadian whiskeys, I had a good one come up for that because this is Canadian Club Classic. So I talked about it a few episodes ago that this was released by Canadian Club as sort of their high-end premium product to appeal to drinkers of Crown Plaza. I keep saying that, I don't know why. Crown Royal.
Been traveling recently.
That's right. But this one's, it's a 12-year-old Canadian whiskey meant to appeal to sort of higher-end drinkers. Now, this would have come out in 1985, which I know because it has a 1973 tax strip on it. So decades later than this, but kind of the same idea, right? This high-end Canadian whiskey market. Mm-hmm. All right, so, and since I'm going to open that one, I thought we would compare it to the last little bits of the 1972 Canadian Club that I tasted with my dad. So nearly the same distillation year. This one's 6 years old, this one 12 years old.
Excellent. Looking forward to comparing.
All right. Do you have any experience with Canadian whiskey?
Relatively limited. My whiskey experience started at the far end of the flavor spectrum with Scotch whiskeys. And specifically, the Lafroig 10 was my first whiskey, which is extremely phenolic, extremely intense.
Everything else from there, it's just like,
It's a downhill ride from there.
At least in terms of intensity. Flavor, I mean, there's some lovely flavored things.
Absolutely, yeah. So mostly American whiskeys, some Irish whiskeys, and the Canadian whiskeys, I don't know, they never seem to have had the same impact in the American bar scene, the modern American bar scene.
Right, that's the thing. In our era, Canadian whiskey, go ahead and start giving this one a sniff. In our era, Canadian whiskey was like, nobody drank it except, old people or something. But it's starting to come back a little bit in more recent years, but that is not the Canadian whiskey we'll be drinking, sort of the new, trendier stuff. What do you have? It smells like Canadian whiskey to me. I'm getting used to this old Canadian Club smell.
Yeah, so this is the Canadian Club.
This is the 6-year-old Canadian Club, distilled in 1972, bottled 1978.
So really light,
Yes.
I always have difficulty with whiskey language, as with wine language, but
We'll get you
I think
drinking and then you'll be more creative.
I'll be very creative. Reading through the descriptions, it's like pineapple upside down cake with hints of dill and anise. I'm not getting that at all, but I think like the stone fruit words would definitely apply here.
Okay, fair. Let's go ahead and take a sip. I'm trying to remember if it's changed since I tasted it with my dad. It's kind of smooth. Like that Canadian name, a Canadian way, like that's really what they were aiming for, was smooth as much as possible. What do you got?
Yeah, it's light in body. It's smooth. It's not that hot. Like it reminds me the most of like a modern light Japanese whiskey, like the Nikkei, for example.
Sure.
I tried earlier today to try to get some more grounding of different whiskeys.
All right, I can see that. Yeah, it's got, very light caramel toffee notes, definitely not a lot of spice or anything. This has sort of a base whiskey and then some rye flavoring whiskey, but, not spicy rye in the way we think of. The modern one, Canadian Club 6-year, is definitely spicier.
I get almost a apple, like a Calvados note to it.
Yeah, a little bit of that. All right, so let's dive into comparing it to our 12-year. So I haven't tasted this one yet. So this one I'm a little bit more curious about. So more time in the barrel. And then we could probably also assume that since they were aiming at a higher end whiskey market, they might be choosing different, barrels as well, right? Or blending, because Canadian whiskey has this sort of this base whiskey and then a flavoring whiskey. This might also have a higher proportion of the flavoring whiskey, would be my prediction, knowing almost nothing. They really did play up the wood, though. They were like,
yeah, more oak, more vanilla.
Yeah, that's what definitely you'd expect from like the extra time in wood, and the fact that they really emphasized that in the advertising. I'm not getting a lot on the nose at all.
It's still very light, like the first one. It still has like a little bit of like an apricot note. Definitely the wood is more prevalent.
Would definitely expect some continuity, right? If you're selling this to fans of Canadian Club, you'd want it to taste like what they think of
Not
CC
iodine
as being.
and smoke?
Probably not. All right.
So I think it's definitely brighter, a little hotter.
Yes. It's hotter, but no more alcoholic. So that's, actually, it is a little more alcoholic, 42% instead of 40.
But also could be more of a peppery rye note as well.
I agree. Definitely more flavor.
Less apple, more caramel, probably from the oak again, or from the wood.
That makes sense. I've tried a bunch of different Canadian whiskeys now.
Very drinkable.
Yeah.
Peppery, very peppery finish.
Definitely peppery. So that definitely backs up my idea. More flavoring whiskey going on in here. All right. So maybe this would appeal to a higher end drinker of the 1980s.
Yeah, of the 80s, definitely.
Of the 80s, right? Yeah, they were trying to compete with Scotch and bourbon drinkers because those were just starting to come back a little bit. But the bourbons probably were not like Lefroy. The Scotch back then were probably blends.
Yes.
Right? So it was like trying to appeal to a blended Scotch drinker.
Yeah, and I think it fits in with the overall whiskey trajectory, which has been really interesting because the lack of interest, the increasing interest, prices were still quite reasonable, and then the manic levels that we'll have to be careful with that.
Assistant, we need a corkscrew. Thank you, our hero.
Magic.
All right, that's my 6-year. That's my 12-year. Now we go to our Carleton Tower. So at least 10 years old, but some very old whiskey and made a very long time ago. And in a bigger bottle. That feels important. So the reason I wanted to taste this, I should say, is because this is made by Hiram Walker, and Canadian Club was also made by Hiram Walker. Even though it's not Canadian Club, same distillery, same manufacturing process.
Very different nose. So there's strong caramel notes to me right off the top.
Yep. I like toffee.
And much less fruit, much less stone fruit. Still not a lot, though. It's still like pretty gently aromaed.
Right. Really, really light noses on these, which is really interesting. We're also not, in a glass that's really going to concentrate the aromas, but we're getting right in there.
Yeah.
And there's still not much. This is, I think, probably 40%. Most Canadian whiskeys are, but I'm not sure it says. That's one of the ways you can tell how old it is. The oldest bottles that I find don't have proof on them at all. All right.
Cheers.
To your parents.
Thank you.
Very different.
Again, tons of caramel, really sweet, really, really sweet compared to the other whiskeys.
Yeah, it's kind of like premium rum, right? Which has this sort of sweetness inherent in it. So what did I say? Bottled 1959. So this is...
Well, and Canadian whiskey regulations allow for much broader modifications to the spirit than American whiskey standards.
And I haven't talked about this on an episode before, but you can have up to 9.09%. Why that math is complicated, but 9.09% of additives. And that could be another kind of whiskey that's not Canadian whiskey. So you could slide some bourbon in there historically, and they did. But it could also be things like wine. You could add a little wine to round out the flavor notes.
There's some really interesting spice notes on it. Like almost like a clove note would, like a clove or mint.
It feels much more modern, even though most whiskeys today aren't necessarily this sweet. I don't know, to me it tastes not sweet in there's sugar added here, but sweet in that way that bourbon is sometimes.
Yeah, very much.
And that lots of corn. So maybe we're seeing more corn in here too. I gotta say, it's my favorite of the three for sure.
Definitely. I also get like a more honey now off the nose, having tasted the sweetness. Maybe it's psychological.
No, but it smells great.
And it has a lot of complexity compared to a lot of like contemporary American whiskeys that are in the same range, like a price range, like a Maker's Mark, for example. There's not a lot going on. Whereas here, like, you can taste something. There's some layering of the spices.
Yeah. This is great. So, I think we really see here the evolution of the Canadian whiskey category, because in the post-Prohibition, post-World War II period, when there wasn't a lot of American whiskey ready, right? It hadn't been aged for very long. Older stocks of Canadian whiskey were really sought after and were sort of the whiskey of choice before American whiskey sort of started getting good again. And then people lost the taste for whiskey altogether and switched over to tequila or vodka. So this is kind of like, I can see what people were excited about.
Yeah, definitely. It is an enjoyable, if in the 60s I received this as a gift, I think I would have enjoyed it greatly. That would have been many years before I was born, but if I were a person in the 60s.
That's good. That's making me really happy. Thank you so much for sharing it with me.
You're welcome.
This was a delight. Are you online on the internet? Should people track you down?
I don't have a lot of cocktail content, but at Jered, Jered, Floyd, Floyd, on pretty much any platform. I think probably on Mastodon I've had the most cocktail content, but that's moving towards Blue Sky. And you can find the Negroni alignment chart, which you inspired a number of years ago.
Actually, I will put the Negroni alignment chart in the show notes because you absolutely need to see that. It is fantastic. You, of course, can find me at My Tiny Bottles on Instagram and Facebook, at TammyLC on Blue Sky, and at my website, mytinybottles.com. please drop down to the bottom of the video and hit that subscribe button. Leave a like, leave a comment, share this with a Canadian whiskey fan of your acquaintance, and be sure to subscribe so you can come back next time and see what else we're tasting and talking about. I'm gonna pick one. This one's almost empty. I'm gonna go with this one. Cheers.
Cheers.